Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, states that 80% of the outcomes are due to 20% of the causes. Named after the 19th century Italian economist Pareto, after he observed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. Later, he then realized that this inequality is also seen in many other aspects of life, including income and wealth. Today, this principle is used in business, finance, and personal productivity, and it can even help us understand the complex world around us. In a business setting, the Pareto principle most commonly refers to 80% of the revenue is generated by 20% of its consumers. This principle can help businesses identify large revenue-generating consumers and target them either through customer service or customer retention. Another use of the Pareto principle in business is that 80% of the work done is done by 20% of the workers. Now, this might not seem surprising because we all know those coworkers who don't do anything and yet still keep their job. A perfect example of this are the recent big tech layoffs in Meta, in Microsoft, and Google. Many thought that it would affect the revenue of these companies and thus affect the products to the consumers, but it did not. In fact, the Pareto principle suggests that if you fire 80% of your workers, you would still be left with 80% of the output you previously had with 100% of your employees. This would of course be assuming that you fired off the least productive workers. Now in this case with the big tech firms, they didn't fire anywhere near 80% of their employees, which suggests that their productivity should stay just about the same, unlike what some of the fear-mongering you might see online. Now, most people don't own a business or run one, but that doesn't mean the Pareto principle can't be useful for them. In fact, the Pareto principle can be very effective in helping with personal productivity and growth. Almost everyone has a to-do list, or some errands to run, or some goals they want to complete, and the Pareto principle suggests that 80% of those tasks can be completed in only 20% of the time. Starting with these first can help eliminate a significant portion of the tasks in a relatively small amount of time. The downside to this, though, is that the remaining 20% of the tasks will take 80% of your time. This Pareto task strategy is very effective if you struggle starting our to-do list, as it gives you the motivation to keep going as you complete tasks quickly. But it does leave the most taxing tasks in terms of time for the end, which some people might not like. The principle can help identify the optimal areas of improvement. It states that 20% of things causing 80% of your problems. By focusing your time on the 20% of things, you can reduce a large portion of your problems with very little effort. Some skeptics of this principle would claim that this phenomenon is just a coincidence, but it is not. Here's some other real-world examples. 80% of a company's customer complaints come from 20% of its customers. 80% of a retail store inventory turnover comes from 20% of its products. 80% of individuals' work is done in 20% of the time they spend on it. 80% of the world's population lives on 20% of the land. 80% of the world's oil reserve comes from 20% of the oil fields. 80% of crimes are committed by 20% of criminals. 80% of accidents are caused by 20% of drivers. 80% of pollution comes from 20% of factories. 80% of songs listened to comes from 20% of artists. Basically, this phenomenon is not a coincidence. It is a constant in our life, like the golden rule. It is everywhere, no matter where you look. This is especially true when it comes to income and wealth. 80% of wealth is owned by 20% of the population. This is a big criticism of capitalism, as many people believe that capitalism is the cause for the income inequality. But in reality, it's not. It's just the Pareto principle acting out its force of nature. If the Pareto principle is naturally occurring, this means that income and wealth inequality is also naturally occurring. This means that laws trying to reduce income inequality would just be ineffective. All it will be doing will be shifting who the 20% are that owns 80% of the wealth. It won't actually reduce any of the inequality. More than likely, it will be shifting that wealth from the people to the government. It is important to note that the Pareto principle, although seen in every aspect of life, is not set in stone. The percentages aren't always exactly 80-20, and actually very often aren't. The idea behind the Pareto principle is that things are not distributed evenly, and that some contribute more than others. That there isn't a linear correlation between inputs and outputs, and that's just because life's not fair, and that's a good thing.